Have you ever stopped to ask yourself what truly separates a millionaire from an ordinary person? Not intelligence, not luck, not inheritance, and almost never raw hard work. The real divider is simpler, sharper, and far more uncomfortable. It's decision. Millionaires make decisions most people avoid. Quiet decisions, internal decisions, decisions that feel heavy at first, because they demand discipline, vision, and total responsibility. And those decisions, repeated when nobody is watching, shape the mind, shape behavior, and eventually shape a person's financial destiny. Napoleon Hill discovered this after studying the wealthiest men of his era for decades. He noticed something that can feel disturbing if you've been taught to chase money as the main goal. Money is never the cause. Money is the effect. The separation happens long before the numbers show up. Inside the mind, in the moment someone decides who they will become. Most people live in reaction mode. They react to bills, react to fear, react to the lack of opportunities. A millionaire lives in decision mode. They decide before results. They decide before guarantees. They decide before they feel ready. And here's the truth most people don't like hearing. It's not that life is easier for some and harder for others. It's that very few people have the courage to make the decisions that require consistency when motivation disappears, clarity when emotions get loud, and responsibility when excuses feel tempting. While most people wait for motivation, the millionaire decides to move. While most people wait for safety, the millionaire decides to advance. While most people wait for permission, the millionaire decides to take control. At the beginning, these decisions don't look dramatic. They can look small, almost insignificant, the kind of choices nobody would clap for. But over time, they create a compounding effect so powerful it can reroute an entire life. In this video, I'm going to show you 4 specific decisions millionaires make, and most people never make. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to face the discomfort these decisions require. And when you start making these same decisions, the first change won't be in your bank account. It will be inside you. Your thinking shifts, your standards shift, your actions become sharper. And then, inevitably, your financial life begins to respond. So pay attention. This isn't about money, it's about who you decide to be from this moment forward. And before we go deeper, I want to ask you something. Deep down, do you feel it's finally time to change your decisions? If this hit you, comment, "I decide differently starting today." There's a silent reason most people never become wealthy, and it has nothing to do with salary, government, or outside opportunities. The real reason is more uncomfortable. Most people have never made the real decision to get rich. Napoleon Hill was direct about this. A casual desire doesn't create wealth. Only a burning desire, transformed into a firm decision, has creative power. And here's the trap. Most people confuse wanting with deciding. They say they want to prosper, but they keep living like they've accepted scarcity as destiny. Look closely. Most people live in a state of spiritual postponement. They say, "One day I'll learn more. When I have extra money, I'll invest. When I feel safer, I'll start." But that when never arrives, because deep down there was no decision, only hope. Wealth requires an internal break. It requires saying, even with fear in your chest, "I take total responsibility for my financial life." And that scares people, because it removes excuses. It removes external villains. It removes the comfortable victim narrative. Napoleon Hill observed that ordinary people negotiate with their own conscience. They make quiet deals with themselves. "I'll try, but if it gets hard, I can stop." A millionaire decides with no emotional escape route. They don't ask if it will be difficult. They decide. And then they reorganize their life around that decision. And here's the most important spiritual diagnosis. Most people don't fear failure. They fear discovering they could have won if they had truly committed. That's why so many sabotage their growth. They start something new, then stop too early. Not because the path doesn't work, but because the old identity clashes with the new one. Wealth demands leaving behind old habits, old circles, old ways of thinking. And that can hurt. There's also a quiet fear of standing out, of growing beyond friends, of leaving the normal lane, of being seen as different. And without realizing it, people choose to stay small so they can keep belonging. Napoleon Hill taught that every fortune begins when a person chooses independent thought. But thinking differently has an emotional cost. It can bring temporary loneliness, discipline without applause, consistency without validation. That's why most people never truly decide. They live in the middle, never comfortable enough to feel peace, never committed enough to prosper. And that middle zone is the most dangerous place to live. If you're hearing this right now, it may be because something in you already knows it's true. Your financial life won't change while your decisions stay the same. And that recognition, uncomfortable as it is the beginning of a turning point. Before money changes, decision level must change. If this message is opening your mind and you want more content that rewires decisions, identity, and destiny, subscribe to Wealth Rewired and turn on notifications. We don't do empty motivation here. We build mindsets that produce outcomes. And for this part, comment, "I commit for real." There's an invisible moment when a person's life changes, and almost nobody notices it when it happens. It's not when the money arrives. It's not when the opportunity shows up. It's when an inner decision becomes irreversible. Napoleon Hill called this the mental point of no return. It's the instant the mind stops negotiating with fear and starts obeying purpose. From that point on, the external world may still take time to shift, but internally something has already been sealed. Before this moment, most people live in attempt mode. They try to improve. They try to earn more. They try to invest. They try to build a business. But trying creates nothing. Trying keeps you emotionally protected, because if it fails, you can say, "Well, I tried." A real decision removes that sentence from your vocabulary. When a millionaire decides, they're not only deciding to do something, they're deciding to become someone. And that changes everything, because ordinary decisions produce occasional action, but identity decisions produce consistent behavior. Napoleon Hill taught that the subconscious responds to clarity and firmness. It does not execute weak orders. If you decide with half your force, your mind works against you. But when the decision becomes total, the subconscious aligns and begins reorganizing thoughts, habits, and perceptions. This is the metaphysical shift. The decision stops being a thought and becomes a command. From that moment, you start seeing the world differently. Opportunities you used to miss begin calling your attention. Conversations feel different. Information that once seemed irrelevant starts looking like a clue. Not because the world changed, because your frequency changed. This is the silent law Hill saw repeatedly in the wealthy men he studied. They made a decision so firm that failure stopped being a psychological option. Not because they were guaranteed success, but because they decided to pay the price of discipline before demanding results. Most people wait to feel courageous before deciding. A millionaire decides, and courage shows up later. Most people wait to feel safe before acting. A millionaire acts, and safety is built on the road. A real decision creates a powerful spiritual effect. It closes escape routes. And when there's no emotional plan B, all mental energy starts working for plan A. That's why after true decision, you become more focused, more selective, and less available for distractions. And maybe you're standing at that exact edge right now. The edge where trying doesn't satisfy you anymore. The edge where you feel a calm pressure to decide, not from impulse but from alignment. If this is resonating quietly inside you, comment, "I decide with firmness." Because that line isn't just words, it's the start of a new internal command. In the next part, we move into what most people ignore. Decision only becomes real when it becomes daily practice. That's where the 4 millionaire decisions come alive. Up to now, you've understood the foundation. Wealth doesn't begin with money, it begins with decision. Now Napoleon Hill takes us to what most people ignore. The decision only becomes real when it becomes daily practice. Millionaires don't make one huge decision once a year. They make small decisions every day, all aligned with the identity they've chosen to embody. Decision number 1. Invest in financial education, even when it feels uncomfortable. Ordinary people spend to soothe emotions. Millionaires invest to expand awareness. They decide to learn before they earn. Reading, studying, listening to the right voices isn't a hobby. It's strategy. Hill warned that the mind must be fed with growth ideas constantly, or it automatically returns to scarcity. Decision number 2. Think long-term even when the world screams for immediate pleasure. Most people decide for right now, spend now, rest now, quit now. The millionaire decides to endure present discomfort in exchange for future freedom. They don't ask, what's easiest today? They ask, what builds my life 5 years from now? Decision number 3. Act in the presence of fear. Here's the common mistake, waiting for fear to disappear. Napoleon Hill was clear, fear rarely leaves before action, it leaves after. The millionaire decides to move even when uncertainty is loud, because they understand courage isn't the absence of fear. It's obedience to a decision despite fear. Decision number 4. Choose who you walk with. Ordinary people choose company based on emotional comfort. Millionaires choose based on mental alignment. They decide to be around people who think bigger, speak ideas, normalize growth. Not from arrogance. This is mental survival. Your environment is programming you every day. Now here's the practical ritual that ties all 4 together. Every morning, a millionaire reinforces one simple identity command. Today, I decide like someone who builds wealth. Before spending, they decide whether it moves them closer to the future they chose. Before delaying, they decide if it's conscious rest or escape. Before listening to opinions, they decide if that voice deserves space in their mind. These decisions look simple, but repeated daily, they rewire the subconscious. And when the subconscious changes, behavior changes. When behavior changes, results follow. Napoleon Hill taught that a habit is just a decision repeated until it becomes automatic. That's why wealth doesn't arrive suddenly. It's built silently, decision after decision, day after day, when nobody is clapping. If this is making you look at your own choices with new clarity, comment, I decide to act daily. In the next part, you'll understand what happens when these decisions become consistent, the moment life starts responding differently. There's a stage in the journey where something shifts almost imperceptibly. You're still waking up early, still learning, still acting in the presence of fear, still choosing better environments, but suddenly, life starts answering you differently. Napoleon Hill observed this repeatedly. When a decision becomes consistent, it forms a mental field, and that field begins attracting conditions that match the identity you're building. This isn't empty mysticism, it's alignment. When you decide long-term thinking, you start recognizing opportunities you used to ignore. When you decide to invest in knowledge, you begin seeing value where you once saw cost. When you decide to act through fear, your posture changes, and people feel it. Quiet confidence is magnetic. A millionaire doesn't chase everything. They become someone who gets found, not because the world became fairer, but because their mind started operating on a higher level of attention and selection. Hill taught that thought saturated with purpose becomes a force. That force shows up as the right meeting, the right idea at the right time, the door that opens without warning. Watch the pattern. The firmer your decisions, the less you scatter. The less you scatter, the more energy you accumulate. The more energy you accumulate, the more impact your actions create. Then the signs appear. A casual conversation becomes an opportunity. A topic you decide to study connects directly to a problem you needed to solve. A person who thinks bigger enters your world. These aren't random events, they're consequences. Most people never reach this phase because they quit too early. They make good decisions for a few days, maybe a few weeks, then retreat the moment discomfort shows up. A millionaire continues when nothing is visible yet. And that's exactly when the invisible begins working. Napoleon Hill called this intelligent coordination. When mind, decision, and action enter harmony, the external world begins reorganizing. Not instantly, but inevitably. Here's what matters. Expansion doesn't happen because you asked for it. It happens because you became compatible with it. Money, opportunities, and connections aren't moral rewards. They're responses to posture, attention, and value, and you might already be feeling subtle signals. Your interest in empty conversations decreases, your patience for excuses disappears, your focus tightens. Those are signs your identity is changing, and when identity changes, reality follows. If this is resonating, comment. I notice opportunities. Because what you name, your mind starts tracking more clearly. In the next part, we move into the deepest layer. The moment wealth stops being an external goal and becomes an internal identity, there's a decisive moment when wealth stops being an external target and becomes an internal identity. Napoleon Hill taught that when this happens, the question is no longer, how do I make money? The question becomes, how does a person like me act? This is where most people fail, because changing results is easier than changing who you believe you are. Many people still see themselves as someone who tries to improve. A millionaire sees themselves as someone who manages growth. That shift is silent but profound. It changes the smallest choices: what you tolerate, what you refuse, where you invest time, energy, and attention. Identity consolidation begins the moment you stop negotiating with yourself. Before, any discomfort was a reason to quit. Now, discomfort becomes proof you're expanding. Before, fear was a warning sign. Now fear becomes a doorway. Napoleon Hill taught that the subconscious accepts what you repeat with emotion and consistency. When you act daily like a person committed to growth, your mind records a simple conclusion: this is who I am now. And when identity changes, effort decreases. You don't need to fight yourself as much to study. You don't need to convince yourself to act. You don't need to wrestle distractions the way you used to. Because now there's coherence between who you believe you are and what you do. This is the stage where millionaires become selective. They stop explaining their plans to people who wouldn't understand. They stop looking for approval. They stop comparing themselves, not from arrogance, from clarity. A strong identity isn't argued, it's maintained. A lot of people sabotage this stage because they try to go back to normal so they don't make others uncomfortable. But their normal is what kept them trapped. A millionaire understands that growth requires breaking social, emotional, and sometimes even family patterns. Napoleon Hill observed that every major transformation requires a season of mental isolation, not physical loneliness, internal focus, a period where your new identity becomes so strong that outside opinions lose power. And once this consolidation happens, something changes deeply. You stop waiting for permission. You stop asking for validation. You stop negotiating your standards. You decide naturally. You decide to learn, decide to invest, decide to say no, decide to continue. Not because someone told you, because it matches who you've become. If you feel that something in you is no longer willing to go backward, comment, "I claim my new identity." In the next part, we'll connect the spiritual and the material, because Hill's philosophy wasn't about wishing. It was about alignment. Mind, faith, and action operating as one. There's a silent mistake that keeps many people stuck, separating the spiritual from the material, as if money and consciousness are enemies. Napoleon Hill saw the opposite. To him, sustainable wealth is born when mind, faith, and action operate in unity. The problem isn't wanting money. The problem is wanting money without inner alignment. When the mind decides but the spirit doubts, progress stalls. When the spirit desires but the hands don't move, nothing manifests. Integration happens when you start acting like someone who trusts, not in luck, but in the law of cause and effect. Napoleon Hill taught that true faith isn't religious in the shallow sense. It's inner conviction. It's the calm certainty that correct decisions, repeated with discipline, inevitably produce results. This kind of faith doesn't shout, it sustains. This is where millionaires differ again. They don't live in spiritual anxiety or material greed. They live in coherence. They understand that every financial decision reflects a mental and emotional state. When you invest in knowledge, you honor your mind. When you act through fear, you honor your faith. When you manage money with awareness, you honor the material world. And that integration creates peace. Peace creates clarity. Clarity creates better decisions. Ordinary people often live in inner conflict. They want to prosper, but they feel guilty for wanting more. The millionaire resolves this conflict by understanding that growth isn't taking from others, it's expanding who you are. Prosperity becomes a natural extension of purpose, not an emotional compensation. Napoleon Hill observed that the wealthiest men he studied shared a sense of mission. They didn't worship money. They used it as a tool for expression, contribution, and freedom. And once you integrate spiritual and material, something powerful happens. You stop chasing monies and you start building value. And where value is consistent, money finds a path. This stage demands maturity. It demands abandoning extremes, not passive spirituality that waits for miracles, and not hollow materialism that ignores principles. The balance is this: decide with clarity, act with discipline, and hold faith through consistency. Here's a simple anchor that grounds this mindset. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Proverbs. Whether you see it spiritually or universally, it points to the same truth. Alignment plus action produces stability. If this view is aligning the way you think about money, purpose, and growth, comment, "I align mind, faith, and action." In the final part, we seal everything with a closing decree and a clear call to commit for the next 30 days. The kind of commitment that changes outcomes because it changes identity. There's a silent instant when a decision stops being understanding and becomes destiny. No sound, no applause, no immediate external proof, but inside you something is sealed. And once it's sealed, you don't go back to the old version of you, not because life gets easy, but because you stop living in negotiation. Napoleon Hill taught that when the mind accepts a purpose with faith, consistency, and discipline, failure stops being a final option. It may show up as delay, it may show up as tests, it may show up as discomfort, but it no longer holds the power to define your story. You've made it this far because something in you already knows. Wealth isn't a lucky break. It's the consequence of decisions made consciously, repeated with discipline, and sustained with faith. From this moment on, you don't need to know every detail of how it will happen. You only need to keep deciding at the same level. Decide to learn, even when you're tired. Decide to think long-term, even when short-term pleasure calls. Decide to act, even when fear tries to freeze you. Decide to walk with people who expand you, not people who limit you. Those decisions compound, and compounded decisions create an irreversible path. Maybe you don't see the fruit yet, but the roots are already deep. The world tests before it rewards. Life observes before it trusts you with more. And right now, you're being observed, not by something mystical, but by the law of cause and effect you've been activating every day. So seal this with me, not as empty motivation, as an inner alignment, an identity command. Final decree. My mind is renewed. My decisions are aligned. I act with clarity, discipline, and faith. I build value every day. I notice opportunities. I honor my purpose, and my prosperity is already in motion. Hold that. Live that. Repeat it for the next 30 days. Because the person you become in 30 days is built by the decisions you repeat when nobody is watching. And if this message met you at the right time, do two things right now. Comment, "I choose discipline," and subscribe to Wealth Rewired with notifications on. Because here every video is designed to raise your decision level, strengthen your identity, and shift your outcomes. Remember, the mind you discipline today governs the destiny you live tomorrow. See you in the next episode.